This story began to develop long before the heroine arrived at Duke Rudion's estate. The life of Linnea, who formerly bore the surname Vasilian, flowed peacefully and smoothly in this place. The girl didn't complain about anything, although it was hard for her to get used to the world of the novel. Everything was going well until Euclid Rudion informed the aristocrat that he wanted to divorce her. It happened on one of those mornings that was essentially no different from the others. However, Lenya was struck by lightning, as she was not prepared for such a turn in her life. The heroine could see from her beloved husband's face that he wasn't joking when he suggested this method to her. Lenya barely had enough strength to avoid causing a major scandal because of the unpleasant news, but the girl understood that her stormy behavior would not make the Duke stop thinking about divorcing her. But all this time, Lenya behaved so perfectly that no one would dare to remember her past cruel deeds. Deep down, the girl hoped that her husband was just joking or not being serious. But Euclid had serious reasons for doing this, so he prepared everything in advance. The Duke signed all the necessary documents to leave the lady part of his property. Such a decisive approach puzzled Lenya, who did not want to divorce her loved one. But the girl did everything all this time to make this guy happy. But for some reason, he still wanted a divorce, although the lady saw no reason for it. Of course, the heroine would never have approved of parting with such a handsome man. So Euclid had to watch as his wife tore up all his divorce papers. Lenya honestly stated that she was not even going to think about such an unpleasant outcome of events. If there had been a real lady in the heroine's place, she would have been at a loss at the sight of her seriously minded husband. But the current girl was radically different from the previous one in all her character traits. She was not going to lose the opportunity to continue seeing her beloved husband just because of his desire. Since childhood, even in the past world, the girl's grandmother told her that money loves her. And indeed, as soon as the heroine was born, her father's financial affairs immediately improved. But the man didn't believe it and drove his wife to divorce, which is why she took their daughter with her. But as soon as the girl left home, her father's business almost immediately went bankrupt and collapsed. So the man had to return to the family he had cruelly abandoned. The heroine's mother still loved her ex-husband, so she gave in to his persuasion. And immediately after their return home, the man's business flourished again, as if there had been no decline. He easily defeated all his competitors and believed that his daughter brought good luck. However, the peaceful time for the girl did not last long, as her relatives soon died. So the lady had to earn her own living, even though it was easy for her. Having become a woman, the heroine became convinced that she had indeed been a magnet for money all this time. Wherever a lady invested, her efforts were sure to pay off many times over. But all this wealth did not bring happiness to the woman, who lived in complete solitude. During the time she was building her business, she completely lost faith in love between people. And only the world of novels supported the girl in her life, so she read with pleasure. The lady fell madly in love with Euclid, even though he was just a character in the story. There were many dangerous guys in this world who competed for the heart of the beautiful Melissa. But the heroine liked the timid and kind Duke Rudion, who rarely appeared in the novel. The fact that so little was written about the guy greatly depressed the woman in love. She had so much money that the lady was ready to spend it on continuing the story, all for the sake of learning more about the sweet Euclid, who won her heart once and for all. So one day the woman finally wrote to the author, saying that she wanted to sponsor him. The answer instantly arrived on the heroine's phone, although she carefully concealed her identity. And the very next moment, the girl found herself in a completely different world, which was that novel. At first, it didn't occur to the lady that she was now Lenya Vasilian in her favorite story. But the reflection in the mirror told the heroine whose body she had magically occupied. The girl had never heard before that such a rebirth of the soul was possible. And in the end, she took the place of the woman who was supposed to become the wife of Euclid Rudion himself. At that moment, the young lady had many more questions in her head than answers. The heroine couldn't even really understand at what point in the plot she had accidentally found herself. Only an unfamiliar female voice brought Miss back to her senses a little, reminding her of reality. But the lady had not yet had time to get used to the fact that she was now a completely different person. It turned out that a faithful servant named Anne had come to the mistress's room with medicine, but the heroine saw this girl for the first time in her life, so she didn't recognize her assistant. This made Anne so worried about Lenya's health that she seemed to forget everyone. Only after a couple of seconds did it dawn on the aristocrat that she had already read about this lady in a novel. It was still difficult for the heroine to accept the fact that she had ended up in her favorite book world. But once the consciousness came to terms with reality, the lady was extremely happy. After all, this meant that the girl finally had a real chance for intimacy with Euclid. In her past life, the lady could not even dream of seeing a handsome guy even once. but she was ready to make up legends about how wonderful Duke Rudian was. The whole problem was that in the novel, this guy's role was practically insignificant. So in her past life, the heroine constantly carved out his beautiful figures herself. And now, finally, the girl has a chance to get closer to such an amazing person. The only thing that upset her was that in the original story, for some reason, the couple ended up getting divorced. But a cunning plan had already been hatched in the heroine's head because she could change the plot of the story. The girl really wanted true love because before she lived only for work and home. But now, nothing was stopping the lady from getting closer to the guy she had been in love with for a long time. So Lenya had to understand more about the moment in the plot where she had accidentally ended up. And first, the lady began to find out where she got these head injuries in the first place. The maid's expression suggested that she was puzzled by her mistress's forgetfulness. But the girl obediently informed the aristocrat that the prince had recently proposed to her sister. Only now did the heroine realize that the real Lenya had staged a serious rebellion after this. But the current girl was ashamed to hear even one mention of this. The lady could not even imagine that her evil predecessor would injure herself in her own father's office. So the heroine was lucky to end up in the body of an aristocrat who didn't know how to stop her madness. And now it was up to Miss to sort out all the problems that Lenya had caused. It just turned out that the girl was put under house arrest after all the adventures. But the most terrible thing for the lady was that the guards pointed their cold weapons at her. Fear consumed the heroine's entire consciousness, and because of this, she lost control of her actions. The maid did not have time to warn her mistress in advance that she was locked up by order of the prince. But Anne knew very well that the aristocrat suffered from a fear of all bladed weapons. It turned out that the previous Lenya also had the same fear, which worsened the heroine's feelings. However, the guards' faces did not reflect even a drop of sympathy for the Grand Duke's daughter. The knights were so obsessed with the rules that they had no regard for common humanity. So the lady had to stay in the room. Although her whole body was burning with the desire to act, only the maid was able to help her mistress. But she was still surprised by the behavior of the young aristocrat. Vasilian forgot that she had never referred to her relatives by their status before. But now everything has changed. And the first to know about it was the assistant who was closest to the girl. Gradually, the conversation turned to what the maid had managed to find out over the past few days. So she told the lady that her captive had been secretly fed by Melissa all this time. But the heroine had no idea that she was still keeping that dangerous man locked up. Terrible emotions were reflected on Lenya's face, and she could not hide them from her faithful assistant. The heroine had little time to correct the mistakes made in the past. It's good that the faithful maid was able to quickly find a rope for the crazy aristocrat. With the help of this thing, Lenya was going to secretly escape from house arrest. The girl was lucky, and this time she got down safely while no one was watching. If it weren't for thoughts about her beloved Euclid, the heroine would hardly have found the strength to descend. The lady had no doubt that Anne would never betray her to the guards outside the door. The only thing that bothered the girl was the cool weather outside at that time. However, Lenya remembered the location of the extension well, so she hardly froze. It so happened that the guards were just changing around, so the path to the building was almost clear. But the heroine still heard someone's footsteps and barely managed to hide behind a tree. It turned out that her younger sister had once again visited the prisoner to give him food. According to the plot, this girl becomes the one with whom most of the guys in this world fall in love. But the heroine personally did not envy the lady's fate, that she could not choose a partner for herself. Instead, she worried that it might be too late to correct her mistakes. The Duke's daughter had no idea what condition the recently purchased slave was in. The girl's heart beat excitedly before the meeting that could determine her fate. It turned out that Richard was in perfect order, except for a little physical exhaustion. It was this man who in the future hated Lenya for keeping him locked up for so long. And that's why the heroine was afraid of this guy, who could do a lot of bad things to her after some time. Of all the handsome guys in this novel, it was Richard who always remained the most dangerous. According to the plot, the guy falls in love with Melissa, for whom he becomes ready to do anything. It is this girl who shows him that not all people can be selfish and evil. So Richard develops feelings for Vasilian's youngest daughter and doesn't want to share her with anyone. On the way to his goal, the guy did not hesitate to use any methods, just to get the lady. But the man Lenya met was radically different from the bandit from the story. His voice was full of concern for the aristocrat who had recently lost consciousness. Even in this state, rumors of what had happened to the Duke's daughter reached the prisoner. Lenya was unaccustomed to seeing concern from the man who, according to the plot, was trying to kill her. She had no idea how to behave with Richard, whom she was afraid to keep around any longer. The reason the real Vasilian bought the guy was cruel and incredibly horrible. The girl wanted to take away the slave's eyes, because they reminded her of the prince who rejected her love. So the heroine still had time to finally release the captive. Only now did the lady notice that the slave mark had already been placed on the back of the guy's hand. This meant that Richard could already be filled with hatred for the lady who bought him at the market. Only the thought that Lanaya had a protective artifact with her helped her not to tremble. The girl was afraid that her actions now could have too negative an impact on the future, so she was determined when she opened the cage containing the lost boy. At this moment, the heroine showed with her whole appearance that she did not want to listen to any protests. While inside, the girl was worried that her behavior would not be too cruel. For some reason, it was noticeable that Richard was not happy about the possible freedom after so many years. But Vasilian was so fixated on correcting her mistakes that she didn't ask the guy's opinion. She prepared everything necessary in advance to ensure that the prisoner survived the first period. Lenya even gave the former slave some money, just so he would have enough strength to leave. All this time, Richard silently accepted gifts from the lady, not understanding what was happening at all. But the Duke's daughter wasn't joking when she said that the guy was now free. But for some reason, these words did not evoke joy within the prisoner, who was tired of being unhappy. The heroine didn't miss the guy's confusion, but she chalked it all up to the fact that she had to apologize. Unlike the previous Lenya, the current one had no difficulty asking for forgiveness for her actions. The girl sincerely sympathized with Richard, who had suffered so much pain because of cruel people. It was clear from the guy's face that he clearly did not expect support from the impudent aristocrat, while the lady had no doubt that she had made the right decision. But all of Lenya's actions brought a stream of sad tears to the face of the lost young man. The heroine certainly couldn't have predicted such a turn of events, even if she had tried. She had no idea why Richard suddenly burst into tears right in front of her. The guy thought that the lady decided to throw it away because it was unnecessary and useless in everyday life. No matter how bitterly he cried, Lenya did not want to further restrict young Richard's freedom. She understood that he was behaving like a child who had suddenly been abandoned by his parents. But any sympathy and weaknesses would have led to the guy subsequently hating her. For a long time, the prisoner tried to move the lady to pity, but in the end, he failed. So he soon came to terms with what was happening and left the dreary and cold basement on his own. Although the heroine did not lock the young man in with her own hands, she still felt guilty for his condition. Who would have thought that the formidable killer would turn out to be such a nice guy in the future? However, the lady had no time to think, because it was time to return to the room. She knew that Richard would have gotten out of prison anyway and become the head of the Assassin's Guild. So it was not profitable for the girl to keep such a terrible person locked up. Under cover of night, she tried to sneak back to her chambers while no one was looking. But her plan was not destined to come true, as the lady heard someone's male voice. But the girl was sure that she had chosen the right time for the night patrol to change. The last thing Lenya wanted in the world was for anyone to find out that she had violated house arrest. She looked back with a sinking heart at the man who had caught her at the wrong time. It was impossible not to recognize this guy, although the heroine had only recently entered the world of the novel. Before her was none other than the youngest son of Duke Basilian, named Alexis. My brother was one of those people who did not tolerate breaking the rules, even among close friends. So now problems were inevitable for Lenya, who tried to return as quietly as possible. The girl had no idea what she needed to say to Alexis to gain his forgiveness. What angered her most was that the Duke's son began to be rude to his sister from the very beginning. But she didn't have time to say anything bad to him, so she considered such behavior unfair. The guy clearly didn't expect the girl to suddenly talk about honor and the rules of communication with loved ones. For the first time in his life, the brother heard his sister address him as her relative. After all, Alexis always ran into a wall of alienation when trying to get closer to Lenya. So at first it seemed to the guy that he had simply misunderstood the words of the Duke's daughter. Before, he could not even hope that a lady would even once treat him with kindness. It was therefore not surprising that Alexis was skeptical of his sister's changes in behavior. In turn, Lenya did not believe that her brother cared about what was happening to her. Both relatives were full of hostility towards each other, which grew over the years. It would have been much easier for the heroine if her brother had simply yelled at her, as he usually did. But in this soft situation, she only became more confused, not knowing what she should do. In the end, an unexpected urge to sneeze forced Lenya to be the first to end this strange conversation. The guy couldn't figure out why his sister ran away from him so quickly. What Alexis was most afraid of was that his sister might burst into tears because of her terrible resentment towards him. But in reality, the lady was simply overcome by a cold, so she was constantly sneezing without stopping. However, the night walk turned out to be too cool for Lenya, and she didn't have time to recover. So the next morning, the heroine was even glad that she had to sit in the room. Only a huge window allowed the Duke's daughter to observe what was happening in the courtyard. And this time, the girl was interested in the fact that many people had gathered outside the estate after lunch. What bothered Lenya most was that she saw Alexis, whom she had run away from at night, next to the others. The heroine couldn't even imagine how much the guy could have told about her. Through the window, the girl noticed that someone important had arrived at the estate, and everyone was greeting him. It turned out that Duke Vasilian had finally returned home after so much work at the palace. The appearance of the father was a blessing for the girl, who wanted to talk to him about her wedding. Lenya did not expect that the maid would immediately invite her to a meeting with the Duke, who wanted to see his daughter. This news delighted the aristocrat as much as it frightened her, because of its urgency. The whole problem was that anything could be expected from Hadrian Basilian. Rumors about the aristocrat's cruelty and cold character were constantly circulating among high society. It was assumed that no one could resist the wishes of this powerful man. And it was from such a father that the heroine planned to receive permission to marry Rudion. Therefore, Lenya mentally prepared herself for a difficult conversation with a dangerous blood relative. Anne supported her mistress in everything, although many of her decisions seemed strange to the servant. But the assistant was accustomed to the fact that she could not argue with the opinion of the young aristocrat of the Vasilian family. Even as she was leaving her room, the girl met a knight whose face was vaguely familiar to her. It so happened that yesterday, Lenya had to use threats to force the guy to keep quiet about her walk. And only now did the lady have time to find out that this guy's name was Gressel Peony. Since the knight did not betray her, Lenya decided to praise this guy in front of her father. In response, the young man nodded his head so quickly that it could easily fall off. Even Anne found it strange that the lady had paid attention to one of the knights. Previously, the maid had not noticed Lenya's interest in recruiting her own defense team. But after the injury, the owner's behavior really changed for the better. The heroine gradually learned to get used to a world to which she initially did not belong. So another unplanned meeting with her brother left the girl at a loss. The guy, as usual, was not in the mood for nice conversations with his older sister. But because of his explosive nature, Alexis generally did not know how to communicate normally with people. The guy was constantly arguing not only with Lenya, but also pretending not to take everything to heart. But it turned out that this time, the screaming young man was driven by genuine concern for his sister. The aristocrat had no idea that not all of her relatives immediately learned about her fainting spell. But what surprised the girl most was that her brother did not tell their father about her nighttime adventures. The brother and sister didn't have time to finish speaking, as another relative came out in response to their noise. It was the eldest son of Duke Vasilian, named Cyanil, whom the younger one always feared. It was not difficult for the heroine to guess what kind of man appeared before her from the Duke's office. But the novel said too little about this guy, who had a stern character. The most interesting thing was that the lady still felt the emotions of the real Lenya. And for some reason, at the sight of Cyanil, the girl was overcome by an inexplicable feeling of great anxiety. However, the aristocrat did not plan to fail, so she was determined to confront her brother. The heroine was much more fearless than Lenya when it came to defending her rights and thoughts. So the boys would never have been able to stop their sister from going to see her father. The Duke seemed to sense his daughter's desires from afar. As he suddenly called her to him, the girl's heart began to beat anxiously at the sight of such a menacing face of the great ruler of the family. And it was not in vain, because the father looked even scarier than in the book descriptions of the novel. What the heroine was most afraid of now was that the Duke would simply send her back without a word. But it didn't look like the somehow confused man was planning anything like that. However, tears still ran down Lenya's cheeks, feeling the emotions of her predecessor. Adrian clearly didn't expect his daughter to suddenly show such strong emotions in front of him. Even the brothers were surprised, as they had never seen their younger sister cry before. Who would have thought that the Duke would not actually be as insensitive as they say about him? The man was unable to ignore Lenya, whose tears seemed sincere to him. The girl did not expect that her father would suddenly hand her a handkerchief so that she could dry her face. The lady immediately realized that in front of her was not at all the stern Duke she had read about. So all the heroine's worries seemed to disappear when she saw her father's identity. Therefore, the girl was no longer afraid that she could be sent into exile for her actions. Lenya was still trying to make up for her past mistakes, so she asked Adrian for forgiveness. The Duke was surprised when he heard from his daughter that she no longer had any claim on the prince's heart. In fact, the man was ready to support any desire of the lady, whom he had little education. Lenya took advantage of this in time, asking her father to marry her off to another man. She argued that she would like to forget all feelings for the heir to the throne. But in fact, the heroine initially planned to be with her beloved Euclid. The lady could only hope that no one in the family would be against her wishes. She could see from her brothers' faces that they didn't really believe that her words were sincere. However, the girl was not going to back down while she had the opportunity to make her dream come true. The heroine didn't need a lavish wedding, as long as this celebration took place quickly. Adrian clearly didn't expect his daughter to suddenly talk to him about such uncomfortable topics, but he couldn't help but live up to Lenya's expectations. As for the first time, she directly asked him for something. Therefore, Adrian was going to find the best candidate for a groom for the girl. The man had no doubt that everything would work out perfectly for him in the end. In essence, Lenya got everything she wanted to hear from the Duke after her unexpected request. But before leaving, the girl still struck one more blow and again asked for forgiveness for her actions. From that moment on, it cost the heroine nothing to properly respect the people who raised her. Her words sank into the soul of the Duke, who always wanted to achieve obedience from his daughter. Only now did Adrian see that he could finally communicate openly with the kinder girl. But the heroine didn't have time to leave the room, because she suddenly felt much worse. The lady herself did not expect that her condition would worsen so much, because she forgot about treatment. Lenya ended up making the whole family worry that she almost fainted again. The doctor, who carefully examined the girl, immediately concluded that she had caught a cold. Naturally, the man immediately prescribed the aristocrat all the necessary medications to maintain her health. Only Alexis and Anne knew why Lenya had a cold if she didn't leave her room. Cyanil immediately suspected that the lady's initial treatment had not been sufficient. At that moment, the heroine could barely hear what her relatives were saying, as she felt ill. The younger brother also joined in this conversation, because he was no less worried about his sister than the older one. Only at the end of their dialogue did the maid admit that her mistress had been looking for the Duke upon awakening. The father had never experienced his daughter expressing warm feelings towards him so openly before. The man's heart sank with trepidation, because he always wanted to get closer to the stubborn Lenya. So, a little later, Adrian still couldn't get the changes in his daughter's behavior out of his head. What touched the Duke most was that the girl finally called him her father. Cyanil also witnessed the girl address him as her own brother. But all this time, the lady was drawn only to her mother, who died too early due to illness. As soon as the woman died, the girl closed herself off from everyone and no longer communicated with her family. So it was surprising for the relatives that the lady finally opened her heart to them. Therefore, the father only became more eager to fulfill all the requests of the girl who had become closer to him. Cyanil fully shared the Duke's feelings, as he played the role of his right hand well. The guy was planning to find an excellent husband for his sister in the near future. Adrian understood that such haste was explained by the fact that the lady could change her mind at any moment. So the man would also like such an important matter to be resolved as quickly as possible. And the first thing they noticed was Duke Rudion, who showed great promise. Of course, it was not only Euclid who learned about such a lucrative offer from the Vassilian family. His faithful assistant Delano could not come to terms with the fact that the master was essentially selling himself. What worried the servant most was that Lenia had a very bad reputation in society. But Rudion looked at this situation from the other side, because his estate was in great debt. Even the assistant could see how bad the gentleman's financial affairs had been lately. So it was not at all surprising that Euclid was completely calm about marriage and had no feelings at all. It was much more important for the boy to do everything to ensure that his family continued to prosper in the harsh lands of the north. Therefore, Rudion did not take into account Delano's opinion that he had been concerned about his well-being since childhood. To Euclid's surprise, during their first meeting, Duke Basilian immediately got to the main topic of conversation. Although Rudion didn't expect that the stern man would be so excited about the marriage proposal, Euclid could never refuse the wealth that Hadrian offered him in exchange for an agreement to an alliance. Moreover, the rumors about Lenya's relationship with Prince Caden turned out to be false, although they were actively spread. Therefore, the guy had no reason to refuse, because he was in an unpleasant situation for himself. At that moment, no one could stop Euclid from his upcoming wedding with Duke Vasilian's daughter. Therefore, the assistant had to come to terms with the sacrifice that his master made for the sake of the family. The Duke addressed Delano with a sweet smile, but in reality, he was escorting him away. So the guy had no choice but to leave Rudion alone. And immediately after that, Euclid shuddered from the pain that struck his entire body due to the disease. Drops of blood fell on the table, as the Duke did not manage to stop the bleeding in time. The guy sincerely hoped that Lenya really had feelings for the prince. After all then, after some time, he would again be able to be left alone with his mortal problems. Meanwhile, the heroine still had to take the medicine that Anne brought her. The girl was already quite tired of feeling sick, but she had no right to refuse. The heroine wanted to act and not sit still, but her relatives did not allow her to do so. No matter how hard Lenya tried, she was unable to demonstrate any improvement in her well-being and health. Just a couple of days ago, the whole family was very worried, because the lady almost fainted. At that time, the girl had no idea that in just a few hours she had attracted the affection of these people. So from now on, each member of the Basilian family was unable to move away from Lenya's bed due to anxiety. But in reality, the girl only dreamed of being left alone during her treatment. She immediately guessed that her accidental tears had such a strong influence on the opinion of all her relatives. So, no matter what words the lady said now in her defense, it was all meaningless. Both her father and her brothers perceived Lenya's words as attempts to show courage and pride. This is how the heroine got stuck in a situation where she was forced to take medication every day. Of course, such care from relatives was much better than indifference. It turned out that it wasn't only the brothers who wanted to see the lady, as Melissa had also approached the maid. The lady didn't expect her sister to become interested in her so quickly, but she couldn't refuse her. The second daughter of the Vasilian family was radically different from all the older children of the Duke. Each time, the heroine was surprised at how this girl had even settled into their estate. Until now, Melissa had been worried about a lot of things, since she had previously lived among ordinary people. But everything changed when the Duke adopted this girl, and the former Lenya was not happy about it. However, the heroine had nothing against such a beautiful sister who would choose between guys. She immediately reminded the lady that she no longer had any feelings for the heir to the throne. But it turned out that Melissa turned down Caden because she never really loved him. This raised even more questions for Lenya, who thought that her sister would be close to the heir. But the girl herself was more interested in the prisoner, whom she accidentally found in the basement. The heroine understood that her relative's talkativeness could lead to big problems in the future, so she had to order Melissa to forget about the slave she had already released. This is how the situation with Richard, which could well have led to a disaster, was resolved. Unlike the real Lenya, the heroine did not feel hatred towards her stepsister. Therefore, she was ready to help her with some matters until the girl got used to the estate. But she didn't expect that Melissa knew about the organization of a military campaign led by the prince. This circumstance explained why Kaiden reacted so quietly to the Duke's daughter's refusal. Many speculated that the boy had followed in the footsteps of his warlike ancestor. At that very moment, the maid interrupted the conversation between the two sisters in a hurry, although it was wrong. Lenya did not expect that the heir to the throne would visit their house again before his departure. No matter how sad the heroine was to say goodbye to Melissa, she let her go on a date with a guy. It turned out, however, that the prince had arrived at the Vasilian estate for the sake of his eldest daughter, not his youngest. But according to history, this guy was one of those who claimed Melissa's heart. So the heroine didn't have a single guess as to why he needed her. No matter what Caden did, he always had a creepy aura about him that could scare anyone. Lenya felt uneasy at the sight of the heir, although he was not against her. What surprised the girl most was that her body felt hatred towards this man. However, the lady had no right to give in to her feelings, so she communicated with Kaiden according to etiquette. The prince was always one of those people who liked to get straight to the point they came for. And now, Elios was interested in the well-being of Lenya, who had recently injured her head. But it wasn't easy to attract the heroine with just sympathy and fake concern. The girl had long since gotten over the time when she had previously been in love with the heir to the throne. But Kaiden wasn't prepared for the changes that had happened to Lenya during his absence. The Duke's daughter no longer planned to run after the prince, who always refused her. But for some reason, this news did not make the heir smile, even though he confessed his feelings to Melissa. It seemed that Elios did not believe a single word the girl said, because who could refuse the place of empress? But the heroine was truly only concerned with her own feelings, and not with titles in society. So, no matter how hard the prince tried, from now on, he could not attract the attention of the stubborn Lenya. The Duke's daughter only hoped that the guy would soon let her go from this strange meeting. What irritated the girl most was the insect that circled right around the heir to the throne. But the swordmaster seemed not to notice the fly, as he was too engrossed in his conversation with Lenya, while the heroine was unable to concentrate due to the annoying insect. So the lady didn't hear how confident Kaiden was that she would ultimately choose him. Lenya's patience lasted for a couple more seconds, and then she swatted the annoying insect. But the lady didn't think at all about how her actions would look from the outside. The realization came to the girl only after she gave the heir to the throne a good slap. It was clear from Kaiden's face that he hadn't often had to endure such treatment, and the heroine herself could not explain that all this time she had been trying to kill an incomprehensible insect. For the prince, Lenya was always a girl who boldly acted recklessly in high society. Her cold gaze and burning jealousy made Caden want to provoke the lady into emotions. That's why he danced with other ladies many times on purpose, although he quickly abandoned them. And the Duke's daughter always resolved these situations in order to continue chasing the heir. But now, it seemed to the prince that they had returned to childhood, when the girl was indifferent to him. This only made Elios even more confused, as he had given no reason for such a strong slap. While the lady understood that she could die now just because of some bug, it was not difficult for the girl to squeeze out words of apology, since she wanted to move on with her life. Lenya was only saved by the fact that it was time for the prince to leave, which the servants reminded him of. In fact, the heir had no intention of hurting the Duke's beautiful daughter. The guy always liked to provoke her emotions, which he did with pleasure now. But this time, Lenya's reaction was different, as she knew about Kaiden's military campaign. With a timid voice, the lady handed the guy a lace handkerchief, which symbolized good luck. Elios never received gifts from the girl everyone considered nervous and angry. But now the aristocrat's face seemed full of embarrassment to the prince, and therefore very sweet. He accepted the handkerchief without hesitation, as the thing instantly became dear to his heart. Who would have thought that all this time Caden actually had feelings for Lenya? Her deep eyes reminded him of the alcohol he often used to distract himself from the war. That is why the affection for this girl was deeper than the prince could have imagined. Her modest gift gave the heir not only emotions, but also the strength to fight on. While after meeting the prince, the heroine felt that she only had more problems. The girl would prefer that the heir continue to show interest in her younger sister. Moreover, Caden was noticeably different from the person described in the original story. So the lady was left wondering if she had been able to resolve the slap situation. That same evening, the heroine surprised another person who knew her. The thing is that Alexis returned from training quite late for a family dinner, and immediately, the guy noticed Lenya's silhouette among everyone else, although she usually never ate with him. But the heroine had no intention of following the past behavior of the aristocrat who ultimately died. In fact, the girl joined the meal by accident, as she only wanted to talk to her father. But in the end, Adrian invited his eldest daughter to dinner with him, and she found no reason to refuse. The man was very worried that the prince might blame Lenya for something after Melissa's refusal. But what caused the girl more problems was that the prince knew about her recent crazy behavior, while the lady would prefer to hide this unpleasant moment so that it does not affect her future. The Duke completely shared his daughter's feelings, so he immediately began to look for the culprit among his beloved family. The heroine honestly admitted that Caden practically asked her to become his lover, but the girl did not expect that this would cause such a strong reaction from her relatives that they became attached to her. The elder brother was even ready to send a protest to the imperial family itself, just to protect his sister. Although in reality, Lenya just wanted to speak out and did not plan to punish the heir to the throne. So the lady had to admit that she did not remain in debt to the impudent Kaiden. Ashamed as the aristocrat was, she told how she slapped the prince with all her might. Alexis was more surprised than anyone else by this, since before his sister had been afraid to even breathe on the air. But now the miss felt ashamed of her behavior, so she asked her family for forgiveness for talking to the prince. Although the girl understood that her blow was insignificant, she still felt awkward. It is for this reason that the heroine would like to forget about that skirmish, because she herself had done something wrong. It turned out that the Duke had not invited his daughter to dinner for no reason, because he had something to tell her. Not long ago, a reply came from Duke Rudion regarding his marriage proposal to Lenya. The girl's heart skipped a beat when she heard that Euclid had agreed to the wedding. As a true fan, the lady couldn't wait to finally meet her handsome lover. The father was no less worried about this than his daughter, and therefore was already preparing a good dowry for her. The lady was not against such care from the Duke, who had previously seemed to her a terrible person. What she didn't expect was that not only the carriage, but also the escort had already been chosen for her. It turned out that it was Gressel who had chosen Lady Anne as her knight, and he did not reveal the lady's walk. Only now did Lenya realize that this was exactly what the maid had meant when she said that she would do everything. So Adrian was glad that they wouldn't have to wait another year for this wedding. He remembered well his daughter's wish that she would become Duke Rudion's wife as soon as possible. If everything had happened according to Vasilian's will, he would have organized a lavish event for his daughter. But the man did not dare to resist the desire of the girl, who wanted to quickly formalize the marriage. In this situation, only Alexis could not understand why everyone was talking about his sister's wedding. It turned out that everyone except the Duke's youngest son already knew about such hasty plans. That's why Alexis was so surprised. Because due to training, rumors about Lenya's desire hadn't reached him yet. But even Melissa, who had the least contact with her sister, was aware of this important matter. So Alexis was the only one left out and didn't know about his older sister's wedding. For some reason, the guy took this ignorance too personally and ran away from dinner without even having eaten properly. So, because of his behavior, the heroine did not feel very well emotionally after the end of dinner. The only thing that distracted her was that near the lady's room, she met the very knight that Anne had chosen as her servant. Gressel clearly wanted to talk to the Duke's daughter, whom he had previously treated with a little disdain. And now, the guy was ashamed of his unchivalrous behavior in front of the lady, who turned out to be good. He did wrong when he believed the bad rumors about Lenia, although she gave no reason. And therefore Gressel wanted to show that from now on, he would be faithful to his beautiful mistress in everything. Only now did the heroine remember that this man had sacrificed himself for her during the uprising. So the girl could definitely trust the guy who was going to serve her for the rest of his life. But Lenya wasn't sure that Gressel would want to go to the northern lands of Rudion with her. Only now did the Duke's daughter learn that this guy was so grateful to her that he didn't worry about moving. It turned out that the girl had taken care of Greshen's poor family at the very beginning of his career. Thus, unexpectedly for herself, the lady acquired an ally, which could serve her well in the future. Of course, the heroine remembered the entire plot of the story, but she didn't know how much she could influence it. So the caring maid who gathered loyal servants around the mistress helped Lenya very much. Although the heroine knew that her behavior was different from her previous mistress, she did not see any protest from her assistant. But the girl even wanted to marry the Duke, who lived too far from the center of the empire. But it turned out that Anne was so devoted to the Duke's daughter that all the other nuances did not matter to her. It is unlikely that the heroine would have been able to find another person so devoted among ordinary servants. Meanwhile, events were taking place in the temple that Lenya had no idea about. The priest prayed with all his might for the salvation of people in this world, but God's predictions were disappointing. He was even ready to help Lenia Vasilian, if that was what the great patron of the world truly desired. The other novices tried in everything to support the priest, who was undermining his health. They couldn't understand why this man with such strong faith was now having strong doubts about something. But the priest Damien was always one of the calmest people among all in the temple. But now the assistant saw fear on the face of a man he was used to seeing as brave. He came to the priest with a matter, because Basilian's daughter wanted to consecrate her wedding in front of the church. Damien received a message from above, so he knew in advance about the lady's desire to contact Rudion. The man had never interfered in matters between temple worshippers and other people before, but now he personally volunteered to conduct the ceremony of Linnea and Euclid. The next morning, the heroine came to her brother to sort out his strange behavior. Alexis was again too irritated at the sight of the girl to take in her words. But the heroine did not want to leave her home, realizing that there remained a man who was offended by her. Although she did not know the reasons for her brother's resentment, she could see from him that he still had not forgiven her. While Lenya was only glad that her father managed to quickly approve her wedding. So the lady was left to sort out Alexis's unclear feelings in order to leave the house. Miss didn't expect that what would upset her brother most was that she treated him differently. It so happened that even Melissa Lenya allowed herself to be called her older sister. But the girl didn't know why the former owner of her body spoke so cruelly to Alexis. Lenya's unpleasant attitude began in her childhood, when her mother was alive. Even then, the boy tried to make friends with his sister, but she rejected all his proposals. For some reason, the girl did not want to communicate well with her brother, although he did nothing bad. But every time his attempts to talk to Lenya ended with even more pain inside. If the heroine had been in the girl's place at that time, she would never have allowed herself to behave like that. In fact, Alexis was still waiting for acceptance from his sister, who had always rejected him. But the lady didn't expect that the guy would remain stubborn to the very end due to mistrust. Everything would have been much easier if the younger brother had a more pleasant and docile character. And in the end, no matter what Lenya said, she was only met with irritation and anger. Suddenly, Alexis started talking about agreeing to make peace if he could come visit. The heroine didn't care who would visit Duke Rudion's mansion, so she gave her consent. The girl saw that the guy was gradually starting to make contact, but he was still angry with her. So, as a sign of peace between them, the heroine handed her brother a handkerchief, which was usually given to knights. She hoped that this gesture would at least slightly appease Alexis, who was too cautious with her. Suddenly, the anger inside the guy turned to joy after such a small gift. It turned out that the brother had been waiting for something like this all this time, so he finally smiled at his sister. So, after a few hours, the heroine achieved the long-awaited peace with her relative. Just a couple of days later, Duke Rudion was invited to the Vasilian estate for an introduction. The guy didn't expect that, for this occasion, he would be provided with a good carriage with fast horses. Unlike the master, his assistant was difficult to bribe with just one kind gesture. Delano still didn't believe that Lenia's feelings for the ruler of the North were sincere. But Euclid was satisfied with everything about this wedding, even though it wasn't on a large scale. He did not share his assistant's suspicions, although he had never doubted his words before. But now the Duke was in a position where he could not refuse the wedding with Lenia, so all of Delano's warnings only cut even more deeply into the anxious gentleman's heart. That's why Euclid couldn't stand it, and ended up forbidding the servant from making any comments about the wedding. The assistant immediately realized that he had said too much, so he obediently fell silent. Only after this stern conversation did the Duke feel a little calmer, as the atmosphere softened. He was already looking forward to meeting his future daughter-in-law, which was soon to take place. The servants prepared Lenya in advance for her first meeting with her future great husband, so the girl was one of the first to come out to the carriage, wanting to see her beloved boyfriend as soon as possible. And in life, he turned out to be even more beautiful than in any pictures of the original plot. But not everything went as smoothly as the heroine would have liked on this significant day. All because in the morning, the girl discovered a small pimple on her perfect face. Even the maid didn't expect this, since there were usually no problems with the aristocrat's face. But in recent days, they had been preparing so actively for the meeting that it could have had the opposite effect. Of course, Anne's experience was enough to deal with even such a difficult situation, so the assistant was going to do her best to make the lady beautiful. Everyone else at the Vasilian estate gathered much faster than Rudion's future daughter-in-law, but none of them expected that today, Lenya would look a little different. The older brother was the first to notice the changes in the girl's face, but she did not have time to make corrections. Euclid was supposed to arrive any minute, so the boy didn't say anything to his sister. And after a short time, the Duke actually arrived at the estate, where he was happily invited. Adrian greeted the guest who was supposed to become his relative with a satisfied smile. Delano was the first to see his future daughter-in-law, and he almost swallowed his tongue from fear. The assistant had no idea that a new type of makeup had become popular in the center of the empire. But at that moment, all the heroine's thoughts were focused only on the handsome Duke Rudion, and the guy turned out to be beyond all praise, so the lady almost burst into tears on the spot. Every cell of her body begged for closeness with Euclid, who struck the girl with his appearance. Only her father's presence saved Lenya from the awkwardness that arose from his silence. The girl remembered too late that she had not even introduced herself to her future groom. Seeing the lady's makeup, surprise inevitably appeared on the young Duke's face. However, he did not change his manners, which made the heroine's heart beat even faster and more joyfully. As soon as she received her first kiss, according to etiquette, the lady almost died on the spot from happiness. If she had her way, Lenya would have stopped this moment forever to enjoy it for eternity. But unfortunately for the lady, the Duke's touch could not last long, because they had only just met, while the heroine was already dreaming about her first wedding night with this wonderful guy. If it weren't for her father's presence, the girl would definitely not have been able to maintain a conversation due to nervousness, and so Adrian diverted all of Euclid's attention to himself, so Lenya didn't have to embarrass herself. But the lady didn't expect that all her makeup would run, which she discovered only later. It turned out that none of the assistants managed to help the lady with this problem in time. However, Rudion's behavior was so perfect that the lady believed that he liked her, but this did not change the fact that the girl urgently needed to change something in her outfit. Just at this time, the maid looked into her mistress's room to help her with her preparations. The assistant brought with her several potions that helped with anxiety and stress. Anne was worried that Lenya might make a bad impression on the Duke if she didn't try hard. But the heroine had no doubt that her wedding would be more perfect than in the plot. Of course, to charm Euclid, the aristocrat needed help from the maid. And the first thing Lenya asked her to do was to completely wash off her makeup and prepare another dress. A few hours later, Melissa was the first to go down to dinner in the company of guests. The owner of the estate got so carried away talking with his guest that they were all late for the evening meal. But the heroine was not upset about this, as she noticed her sister's surprised look. The whole point was that this time, the girl managed to choose the perfect look for herself. So now, nothing stopped her from seducing the Duke, who had already married her. But the lady didn't expect that she wouldn't be the only one who would find Euclid a pleasant person. It turned out that his manners and appearance left a good impression on everyone present. That's why Lenya only wanted to get closer to the guy she loved in her past life. Of course, she couldn't admit this to anyone, so she was silently consumed with feelings. But soon Duke Vasilian came down to dinner, bringing his sons and guests with him. And Euclid also managed to change his clothes, so now he only charmed everyone around him even more. Adrian had already managed to accept his daughter's fiancé, who pleased him on all possible counts. while the girl again admired the appearance of Euclid, who constantly attracted her. In fact, the lady had expected their outfits to be a match. But this did not happen. However, Duke Rudion's beauty so captivated Lenya that she did not even think of being upset. Adrian seated the newlyweds opposite each other, so that they met each other's eyes once. And Euclid suddenly turned away from the girl, his face noticeably blushing. The heroine did not expect that she would be able to please the Duke she was marrying so quickly. She didn't even hope to please her favorite's tastes, since there was nothing about them in the plot. While they were having dinner, the Duke continued to skillfully conduct conversations at the table, which he was excellent at doing. The man managed to pay attention even to his daughter, although he could only focus on the guest. But the heroine was so engrossed in admiring Euclid that she completely forgot about the food on the table. She was already impatient to learn as much as possible about Duke Rudion, although she was seeing him for the first time. The lady could hardly contain her feelings for this guy, which appeared in her past life. This time the girl was lucky, and her brother attracted the attention of the handsome and elegant guest. He remembered that Euclid had little nephews, but he didn't notice them with the guy. It turned out that the Duke was afraid to take the children with him, as the trip would be difficult for them. Only now did Duke Vasilian realize that their guest could not stay long. Only the heroine took this point into account, so she had already collected all her things for the move. The girl was eager to set off, as she did not want to delay the wedding. But for some reason, all the relatives clung to the emperor's approval, which the lady did not understand. Even Adrian was unable to explain to his daughter why he tried to observe ancient traditions. The whole situation with Duke Rudion's arrival was short-lived anyway, because he was in a hurry. The boy was not ready to leave his nephews on the estate for long, although they were well looked after. So it turned out that Lenia would soon have to leave her home. Melissa was the most upset about this, because she was afraid that she would not be able to see her sister. But the father was confident that his daughter would be able to come visit often to meet with them. No one expected that the heroine had long considered the northern lands her new home. This confession from the girl surprised all the aristocrats present. Even Euclid did not believe what he heard, since he did not know about the feelings of his future wife. While Lenya didn't even think of joking about something like that, because her statements were serious. The heroine couldn't even imagine that she would end up liking Euclid's surprised face so much. A couple of hours later, the dinner was over, and only the Duke could no longer control himself. So Lenya was ashamed of her father's behavior, which was already noted by her wedding tomorrow. But Euclid accepted the drunken Adrian calmly, as he respected his motives for doing so. The guy was absent for so long that the assistant began to worry about the master. But in the end, Duke Rudion was satisfied after dinner with the future relatives of Vasilian. What Euclid remembered most was the image of Lenia, because he didn't expect such beauty. It turned out that Delano also remembered the girl well, although he had his own reasons for this. The guy had never seen such strange makeup on girls before. It was just that Lenya accidentally caught Rudion's fancy, so he considered her incredibly beautiful. Who would have thought that Euclid would like a lady with a somewhat intimidating aura? So Delano had to give in on this matter, because this wedding had been planned for a long time. In fact, the Duke only planned to marry for a while and then leave the girl alone. But her appearance struck him from the very first meeting, something Euclid himself did not expect from himself. Rudion didn't even dare dream that such a girl would have feelings for him. It turned out, however, that Duke Vasilian was in a hurry with his daughter's wedding for a reason. Before, Euclid didn't even think about the reasons for the wedding, because he needed financial help. But suddenly, Adrian admitted that Lenya used to have an incredibly terrible character. However, much changed after the prince proposed to one of the Duke's daughters. Initially, Vasilian thought that Caden had finally paid attention to his eldest daughter. Even Euclid, who lived in the north, knew about this sad love story of Lenia. No one expected the girl to recover so quickly after her feelings were not reciprocated. So it came as a surprise to Duke Rudion that it was Lenia who wanted to marry him. Adrian was clearly proud of his daughter for making an informed decision on her own for the first time. Until now, Euclid could not understand how he managed to attract such a beautiful girl from the center of the empire. Now, more than anything in the world, Rudion was afraid of losing the trust of the rich Duke. At that moment, their carriage drove up to the gates of the estate, and the knight stopped them. Delano was outraged by the assistant's stupidity in not recognizing his own master on guard. Instead of arguing, Euclid personally stepped out of the carriage to calm the knight down. The Duke didn't mind showing himself off once again, just to avoid any misunderstandings. The guy clearly didn't expect that, after so much time, Rudion would personally visit this place. The Duke's expression did not allow for any objection, as he was too tired. The whole point was that this estate had been empty for many years, but they could not sell it. So all the servants did not expect the master's sudden return, but were glad to see him. The butler immediately met the owner, in whose absence he carefully supervised the affairs. The guy turned out to be an unusually talented person, so everything came easy to him. But now, Euclid had no time for talking, because he just wanted to quickly take a shower and rest. Only after the bath did some of Rudion's stress disappear, as if he hadn't been stressed out all this time. As soon as the Duke left the shower, he was immediately met by one of the estate's faithful assistants. This young man's name was Rick, and he was ready to do anything to make his master happy. But Euclid was used to not trusting anyone who served this estate in his absence. Therefore, the boy hurried to be left alone, since he knew something about which he kept silent in front of the servants. No matter how much his assistants helped him, they all just wore masks and played their roles. While this estate remained an unsafe place for the ruler of the North, it was not difficult for him to find the listening device once again, which were everywhere. Moreover, there were several such surveillance devices in his personal room alone. Even after a thorough search, the Duke was not sure that he had found all of these instruments. So this estate still scared him to death, but there was no other place to rest. Since ancient times in the history of the empire, there were two noble families that did not fear the wrath of the emperor. The first clan became the ruler's right hand, and the second clan received the position of court magician. The conversation was about Basilian and Rudion, who received titles after a successful battle for the throne. But for some reason, Duke Rudion ended up exiled to the cold north, and for the first few centuries, Euclid's family lived quite happily, even at such a distance. But everything changed a couple of years ago, when the young man learned of his father's death. His brother, who for some reason was also preparing for his own imminent death, told him about this. All that was left for the young heir to the family was loneliness and some evidence from his brother. At first, Euclid resisted his fate and hated all the emperor's followers. The guy sincerely could not understand why such terrible events happened to his family. As soon as he found the listening devices, he began to suspect all the servants around him. All this time, the young duke lived in the center of the empire only for the sake of his young nephews, who were small. But soon his body began to fail, and the boy realized that he didn't have much longer to live. This fate was too hard for Euclid, that he was left all alone too early. He understood perfectly well that the servants of this estate would not help him get rid of his illness. Most of all, Rudion feared for his nephews, who would have no one to take care of after his death. So he deliberately demonstrated his weakness so as not to provoke the emperor's wrath. And until now, Euclid did everything just so that his nephews had a chance at a good life. Therefore, the Duke did not have a single opportunity to refuse such a profitable marriage. The very next day, everything was ready for the wedding between the beautiful newlyweds. The maids were no less worried than their mistress, so they prepared for the wedding in advance. Rudion understood that in the future he could hurt his beautiful and young wife, but he was in no position to argue with this amazing girl and her desires. In general, the heroine hoped that the morning of her wedding would turn out perfect, because she had planned everything in advance. But from the very morning, unpleasant surprises awaited her, which were not part of Lania's plans. That's why the relatives met the girl with sad faces, as they had overindulged in drinks the previous day. And the result was that at such an important event, both the father and the older brother did not feel very well. In fact, Adrian would like to arrange a lavish celebration for his beloved eldest daughter, but the heroine didn't want to see people at her party whom she didn't even really remember. Lenya didn't expect that changes in her behavior would lead to better communication with her family. It turned out that all these long years, Adrian had been trying unsuccessfully to establish contact with the adult lady. The man was glad that he could finally have a heart-to-heart talk with his daughter, and they both understood each other. The heroine was pleased to realize that the aristocrat sincerely cared about her well-being. He even got the high priest to bless the girl's marriage, although he was too hasty. As soon as Melissa heard Damien's name, she visibly coughed due to nerves. Only Lenya knew about the story of her sister, who had feelings for this man. The priest was truly one of those people who could be trusted with any secret. This is what won over the youngest daughter of the Vasilian family. But Damien did not reciprocate her feelings, so the lady was not surprised that Melissa was still worried about her meetings with the priest. The only thing the heroine was afraid of was that the priest could understand what world she came from. Duke Rudion was also worried for his own reasons, although he himself did not expect such emotions from himself. The guy thought that since this marriage was arranged, he would not feel anything at that moment. And in the end, Euclid was faced with the fact that he couldn't even bring himself to cross the threshold of the room. However, the desire to talk to Lenya before the wedding was stronger than any prejudice. The Duke hoped that the girl would not be busy, but he did not expect to see her doing such an activity. He had no idea what exactly was in the jar that the Duke's daughter planned to drink. For some reason, Euclid immediately decided that the lady had chosen death by poison instead of marrying him. The Duke would not wish such a terrible death, even on his most dangerous and damned enemy. That's why he didn't hesitate to stop Lenya from taking the strange potion in the mysterious bottle. Rudion had been afraid of death so many times that at that moment he was overcome with unpleasant emotions. The guy didn't even try to find out what exactly the girl was trying to take before the wedding. But in fact, the heroine had no intention of dying, since she had dreamed so much of such a husband. So the lady had no idea why her beloved suddenly showed her such strange emotions. Initially, the Duke did not take the marriage seriously, hoping to eventually call off their engagement. But everything came to the point that in a couple of minutes they would become husband and wife for many years. Lenya was the first to realize that there was a misunderstanding because she wanted to take a sedative. The heroine would never have allowed herself to die on such an important and exciting day for her. It was precisely because of the stressful anticipation that the miss asked the maid to bring her more potion. So the Duke drew the wrong conclusions because he was not privy to the situation. Euclid had no idea that he would do something so shameful and embarrassing even before the wedding. He was lucky that his future wife had the patience and acceptance to last for many. But even for her, it seemed strange that the groom would visit her in the church before the wedding. It turned out that doubts were tearing the Duke apart from within because he was never able to speak with the lady alone. The heroine could not even imagine that the guy would consider himself unworthy of marrying her. Euclid sincerely wished happiness for the Duke's daughter, who he liked at first sight. But he didn't see this happiness next to him, which the maid accidentally heard about. At the sight of his assistant, the Duke guessed that the wedding ceremony would soon begin. In the end, Rudion ran away so quickly that Lenya didn't even have time to object to his sad words. This conversation left the girl's thoughts confused, and she didn't know what to think next. But as soon as the lady saw the handsome Euclid again, her resentment immediately disappeared. The guy looked like he had just stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine among models, and Lenya was no worse than him, although she considered herself not as beautiful and attractive. Even in her past life, Duke Rudion was an example of kindness and beauty for the girl, so she was ready to watch him for hours, even though it would definitely arouse suspicion. This time, the guy didn't show his concern, but only recently he was worried about his marriage. Even Lenya concentrated on what was happening, so as not to miss a single moment of this miracle. The heroine put so much effort into walking hand in hand with her beloved. And finally, the girl's dreams came true, and she married the real Euclid. The wedding ceremony, conducted by the priest, took place according to all the rules of the temple. Damien felt the weight of responsibility from the message from above, but he didn't show any concern to anyone. The priest could not understand why it was so important to betroth the Duke's daughter to Rudion. But he was not one to resist God's will, so he obediently delivered the vow speech for the couple. But the words the priest chose for this were clearly not an ordinary initiation. Lenya had never heard anything like this advised to young couples before. Even the other priests were surprised, because Damien's speech was different from the usual. While Duke Basilian was very angry with the priest because of his deviation from his duties, there were other people who disagreed with Damien's speech that he had prepared for this moment. But the man did not pay attention to anyone, because God himself told him to say these words. He tried his best to convey to Lenya that she should be more careful with this life. But the heroine had no intention of following the fate that was destined for her in the novel. Therefore, the girl honestly admitted to the priest that she planned to change her life. No one present understood why the priest and the Duke's daughter started talking about this topic. And Damien managed to not focus on the dialogue, which concerned only two people. Soon the time came for the newlyweds to take their wedding vows. Duke Rudion was the first to say all the necessary words, and he didn't even stumble once. But the heroine clearly messed something up in her oath, because she forgot her entire speech out of excitement. The girl herself did not expect that even a calming potion would not be enough for her. Only a skilled priest saved the lady from shame, because he quickly filled the resulting pause in words. Immediately after this, the maid brought out the jewelry that the two spouses would now wear. These rings had been passed down from father to son in the Rudion family for a long time, so Euclid guarded them very carefully. But now he was ready to share this treasure with his wife, since he had accepted her into his family. In fact, the guy had no plans to actually touch the lady he barely knew. However, he obediently approached the girl when the priest announced the need for a kiss. The heroine was eagerly awaiting the moment when what she had dreamed of for a long time would finally happen. Only Euclid whispered to the girl that he would not just pretend to touch her. This is how Lenya's dreams were shattered at the very beginning, although the girl wanted it to continue. But in this situation, she was powerless to influence the decision of the stubborn and caring guy. Only the lady was dissatisfied with just a hint of a kiss while she wanted more. However, the girl had to swallow her resentment, since now was not the time for this. Immediately after the wedding, there was talk that Lenya would go to her husband's estate. The father saw his daughter off with love, as he regretted that they were parting so quickly after their reconciliation. The Duke was ready to receive the girl as a guest at any time of the day or night, if she wished. The heroine was pleased to realize that she still had loved ones at the Vasilian estate. She was even not averse to maintaining contact through letters with her sister, whom she had previously envied. Melissa beamed with joy when she realized that her relationship with her eldest was repaired. Only Lenya did not pay enough attention to her brothers, as she was in a hurry to set off on her journey. The girl was afraid that Alexis would make a scene again about such a quick wedding. Moreover, for some reason, the heroine's internal hostility towards her older brother only grew stronger. Although Lenya couldn't explain it, she instinctively tried to stay away from the guy. However, she still had to turn to him, since her brother called out to his sister first. No matter how hard the lady tried to avoid communication with the elder, it was impossible in one mansion. It turned out that Cyanil had ordered another carriage for the girl, and it had not yet arrived. But Miss had to put in a lot of effort to communicate politely with this guy. However, she liked the fact that he took care of a wedding gift for his sister. Although their relationship left much to be desired, Cyanil was a good older brother. So soon they heard the clatter of the horse's hooves that brought that very carriage to the estate. But the lady didn't expect that, inside her, there would be a guy whose face was familiar to her. He was the head of a magic tower, who, according to the story, did a lot of bad things because of love. His name was Michael Sandoval, and he was always known for his lack of punctuality and neatness. Even Cyanil could not have predicted that this man would personally deliver the ordered carriage, while the head of the tower was only too happy to bestow such an honor on his beloved clients. Besides, he had a warm relationship with Euclid, so he congratulated him on his wedding. No one expected that the Duke of the North would work closely with the head of the magic tower. Therefore, Michael was not invited to the celebration, so he did not prepare a gift. In fact, Rudion did not expect anything from his friend, even if he had been invited to his wedding. Sandoval was much more successful and intelligent in his work than in his friendships. Therefore, the tower's leader quickly switched to a new type of carriage that had only recently been developed. However, the heroine was dissatisfied with this invention, which was not particularly comfortable inside. The girl even suspected the magician of coming from her world, since his motives were similar. She never thought she would ever encounter something so sloppy on the outside. While Michael was ready to defend his new miracle of mind and nature to the last. So an argument broke out between the girl and the boy, until it was decided to carry the things in the carriage. Only Rudion was able to settle the quarrel between his wife and his friend, since he understood the head of the tower well. The Duke still couldn't believe that his daughter had married a good guy so quickly. He was torn apart inside by a feeling of sadness, which was mixed with pride for the smart Lenya. After all the relatives guessed that the girl easily bypassed the brilliant magician. The guy gave away his old carriage without any problems, receiving a newly created one instead. But everything turned out to be not so simple, because he completely forgot about one important point. As soon as his assistant saw the new carriage near the estate, he realized that fatal mistake. The whole point was that the servant put the money for the creation of the carriage into the old carriage. But the heroine didn't even suspect that she had become richer because of the correctly chosen carriage. The girl was much more worried about the fact that she had finally run away from her home. All this time, the lady was afraid of another meeting with the prince, who seemed to her an unpleasant person. But now, Kaiden had no reason to approach the lady who had successfully married. Although Miss never reached her beloved's lips, she considered achieving this a matter of time. In the end, the heroine will now live in the same mansion with such a wonderful man. So Lenya was already making plans for the future, intending to become happy next to Euclid. Only after some time did Emperor Owen learn about the wedding of his old friend Basilian. Initially, the ruler decided that all this news was just someone's evil joke in society. But it turned out that Duke Vasilian was quite serious in marrying his daughter, off at her own request. Adrian was never afraid of Owen, so he was able to tell him everything in person when they met. But the last thing in the world the emperor wanted to see next to Lenya was Duke Rudion. This is all because he had a quarrel with this family for a long time, and he exiled them to the far north. Meanwhile, the heroine enjoyed the trip, even though it was difficult for her. Along the way, Delano noticed that the Duke's daughter clearly had some talent for money. The guy couldn't help but report this to the gentleman, and that he also didn't expect such skills from his wife. But Lenya seemed to literally attract not only people, but also huge amounts of money. So, some unknown guy gave her an expensive watch as a token of gratitude for her help. And then the girl easily won expensive toys for her husband's nephews in the lottery. For the first time in his life, the assistant had seen someone have so much success in financial matters. But all this played into the hands of the Duke, who was trying to pay off his family's debts. In fact, he was deeply moved by Lenya's vow during the wedding in the temple. However, the guy continued to stubbornly reject the fact that the girl could have feelings for him. Meanwhile, the heroine was sincerely worried about the fact that the carriage was constantly shaking in the mountains. After all, the girl bought so many gifts that she wanted to bring them safe and sound. The lady's maid was the first to notice that they had almost arrived at the Duke's famous estate. This building was as impressive in its scale and grandeur as the imperial palace, so the heroine was breathless at the thought that she would live in such a wonderful place. But what surprised Lenya most was that all the servants of the estate had gathered for the arrival of their master. The assistants were fully prepared for the Duke and his wife to arrive soon. The girl felt the tension hanging in the air as her servants worried about the lady's condition. But soon, she became interested in two small children who tried to keep their distance. It was Marianne and Dorian, who were left without parents, and Euclid carefully sheltered them. It turned out that the Duke himself did not expect that all the assistants in the estate would come out to meet them. But the guy was genuinely happy that he had such a good family in the mansion. He only hoped that Lenya was not frightened by the menacing faces of some of the servants, all because the Duke understood the curiosity that tore his assistants apart at the sight of the girl. The nephews were also interested in the fact that their beloved uncle married a lady. The heroine was interested to meet such sweet children, although she had never interacted with little ones before. But the girl could not resist the sight of the shy faces of Duke Rudian's nephews. Euclid himself had often encountered the situation where children periodically avoided communication with adults. But the heroine wasn't upset by the kids' shyness, because it always took time to get closer. Everything seemed to be going well, but at that moment, Dorian suddenly started shouting at the Duke's daughter. No one expected that the children would behave so strangely with the welcome guest at the estate. Euclid felt more ashamed than anyone else for his nephew, who called his wife a real witch. The girl had just heard that witches were considered beautiful, so she took it as a compliment. It turned out that the boy really couldn't resist Lenya, although for some reason he was being very naughty. The heroine prepared sweets in advance to charm the little children, and in the end, the girl's plan worked out even better than she could have initially thought. The Duke did not expect that his newlywed wife would be able to find an approach to his nephews so quickly. But even after a couple of hours, the lady couldn't get the children's strange behavior during their acquaintance out of her head. But the maid was unable to find out any details, so the matter was left to Lenya. The aristocrat tried to prepare as best as possible for her first dinner with her family, but the girl didn't expect that they would give her the farthest seat at the table. But the heroine so wanted to examine the face of her beloved Duke Rudian as carefully as possible, so she immediately expressed her desire to sit closer to her new relatives in this estate. The servants clearly did not expect that the new mistress would want to get closer to the others so quickly. But Euclid was not against Lenya, promptly taking over all the responsibilities. Only the guy misunderstood the lady, so she still sat in the same place. But the heroine didn't become indignant anymore, because she noticed an unfamiliar woman nearby. It was she who looked at her so angrily upon her arrival, as if she wanted to kill her on the spot. But what bothered Lenya most was that the children kept looking back at this woman. The plot made no mention of a person looking after the Duke's nephews, so the heroine mistakenly took the aristocrat for an ordinary nanny for small children, while this woman's name was Amy Bierce, and she was Marianne and Dorian's aunt. But Lenya couldn't allow another lady to be in the estate without permission. Moreover, it turned out that Euclid received Amy every morning when she came to visit him. For some reason, this whole story about Bierce babysitting the children did not give the girl any peace, so she took advantage of her position and drove the woman away until tomorrow morning. Since Lenya had already become the Duke's wife, no one in the estate dared to argue with her. So, no matter how angry Amy was about this decision, she just obediently bowed in agreement. Before leaving, the aunt gave the children a very telling look, which they understood. In fact, Dorian did not have pleasant feelings for this woman, because he was deathly afraid of her. But his desire to stay close to his beloved uncle was so great that the boy endured everything. Until now, the little boy had hoped that his older relative would one day read him a fairy tale. The Duke cared so much for the children that if they asked, he would do it. It was only at the most inopportune moment that Marianne realized her brother's wishes, so the girl quickly changed the conversation to the fact that the newlyweds would sleep together. For some reason, Euclid was embarrassed by such frankness on the part of his young and inexperienced niece. The guy felt a sharp awkwardness that rose like a lump in his throat because of the embarrassing conversation. But the heroine had been waiting for a long time for the moment to spend time with her beloved husband. In fact, a few hours before dinner, Lenya had specially appeased the children with gifts. Although she did not understand the strange behavior of the children, she believed that they would be happy with the toys. And the girl was right, because no child could refuse a mountain of surprises. But the children couldn't behave honestly, because Amy controlled them in everything. While the kids liked Lenya not only because of her beauty, but also because of her kindness. But the nephew's joy was not destined to last long, because soon Berth appeared in the room. For a long time now, Marianne and Dorian have only trembled with fear at the appearance of their own aunt. All because the woman did not love children at all, and only used them for status. So Berth carefully set the children against the Duke's wife, who did not like her. The woman was afraid that the new lady in the estate could greatly affect her status. But this time, Marianne dared to object to her aunt, because she liked Lenya's behavior. However, Amy was against the Duke's daughter, about whom she had heard a lot of gossip. The children could not resist the cunning of the adult woman, whom they trusted completely. So Berth easily manipulated her nephews to achieve her goals. It was for this reason that Marianne started a conversation about the newlyweds getting closer that night. With this, the girl confused everyone present at the table, except the heroine, who was prepared for this. The girl specifically raised this topic because she still wanted to disturb her nervous aunt. With her childish innocence, she was able to win the hearts of all the adults in the estate. But the heroine didn't even know about the rules of the estate, which she had only arrived at that afternoon. But it turned out that all the newlyweds were obliged to sleep in the same room according to the rules of the Rudion family. The lady found these conditions strange, but she was not going to dispute them. Besides, the Duke was already too embarrassed to continue this conversation any further. As a result, Lenya herself could not concentrate on food because of thoughts about the upcoming night. True, this evening the girl was not really preparing for the meeting with her husband, which would soon take place, while Anne was burning with the desire to dress up her mistress in such a way that she would strike her newly made husband. However, the heroine was sure that the Duke would not touch her that night anyway. No matter how hard the lady tried to get closer to the guy, there was still a distance between them. So by nightfall, Miss had given up all hope that anything could happen. Even the servants of the estate knew very well about the timid nature of the gentleman, who was polite with the ladies. Until the very end, the heroine remained calm before the decisive meeting with the Duke. But Lenya didn't expect to find Euclid decorating their bed. This situation surprised the girl so much that she stood awkwardly in the doorway of the room for a long time. Rudion was clearly no less embarrassed than his wife, who had come to his bedroom so early. All the guy's excuses looked pathetic, although he was just trying to add a little decor. The lady had no doubt that Euclid was telling her the truth, because his intentions were always pure. But the room was always so beautiful that it was perfect for the wedding night. For the first time since their wedding, the Duke addressed the girl as his wife. He immediately warned the lady that she need not worry about her safety that night. Lenya suspected from the very beginning that Rudion would not dare to touch her, so she wasn't surprised when the guy honestly admitted he had no intentions towards her. In fact, the heroine wanted more, but she understood that she couldn't rush into intimacy. So for this night, Lenya had prepared several topics for sensitive conversations between them. But the girl's own body failed her due to fatigue after a long trip. Euclid instinctively tried to catch his wife, but instead fell onto the bed with her. Who would have thought that an embarrassing situation between the newlyweds would happen so quickly? The heroine's heart beat faster because of the closeness that accidentally arose with her beloved. As a result, an awkward atmosphere arose between the couple, and Leslie did not know how to fix it. The girl couldn't think of anything else to do but talk about Euclid's feelings for the ladies. The Duke was visibly confused when his wife suddenly asked him about his secret relationship with the lady. The whole point was that the heroine was ready to tolerate her mistress in order to save this marriage. The guy's silence only further strengthened Lenya's suspicions that she knew nothing about her beloved. But even so, the Duke's daughter was able to accept a lot, just to stay close to Euclid. It turned out that the guy never even planned to fall in love with other girls. Lenya was not ready to believe that from now on, Euclid would remain faithful only to her. But the appearance of his wife was not an empty phrase for the Duke, who always treated people responsibly. So the heroine accidentally heard the cherished words that were pleasant to her heart. Therefore, Miss was no longer able to restrain her desires, which were constantly bursting out. She still put on a maid's outfit, so she was ready to seduce the Duke. Lenya tried to use all her charms to enchant her beloved boyfriend from the novel. But until the very morning, what the lady had dreamed of in her past life had not happened between them. So the heroine's wishes were not destined to come true, due to the stubbornness and delicacy of Duke Rudion. Even though the girl decided to seduce him, it didn't bring any results. Instead of giving in to his feelings, the guy was the first to fall onto the bed to sleep. And so it happened that the newlyweds simply slept next to each other the whole night. But the girl was ready to forgive any of the Duke's whims because of his incredible beauty. She could have admired his appearance for hours if she hadn't noticed that the guy was waking up. As a result, after a couple of moments, the Duke actually opened his eyes, but Lenya had already pretended to be asleep. She deliberately lay down on her beloved's shoulder in order to at least get a little closer to him. Euclid clearly didn't expect the lady to carefully move closer to him during the night. The desire to get out of bed fought within him with the desire to let his wife sleep a little longer, while the embarrassment gradually increased due to the fact that the lady was so close to him. Luckily for the Duke, the heroine did not torment him for long, pretending to be sleeping soundly. She remembered that today, she had to explore all the surroundings of the large estate. But Euclid had so much to do that he couldn't help the girl with the excursion. Before Lenya could say a word, the guy quickly ran out of the room to go about his business. But the lady had planned to spend the morning together, since they had been newlyweds since the previous day. Due to her upset, the heroine did not notice that the Duke ran away with a red face from embarrassment. A few hours later, the maids helped the girl prepare to inspect the huge estate. The Duke's daughter was eager to quickly learn all the secrets of this beautiful northern place. Her enthusiasm frightened even the butler, who had seen a lot in his long life. What most attracted Lenya was the opportunity to see Euclid in his childhood, but the lady decided to save this for last because she needed her own workplace in the new house. It just turned out that the assistant had not managed to prepare a study for the Duke's wife. All this time, he shared all the duties with the master, so he did not expect help from the outside. But the butler was only too happy to hand over his duties to fresh blood in the person of Lenya. Only now did the girl notice that the entire estate was dark, although there were lamps. But it turned out that they were not lit because the budget of the Rudion family was insufficient for this. The butler felt awkward talking about how his master's debts remained too large, but the heroine was confident that her dowry would be enough to pay off her debts. According to the plot, it was she who sorted out the finances, so the lady got involved in this matter. Meanwhile, Euclid couldn't collect his thoughts because of the memories of his wife. The assistant quickly noticed that the Duke had been in a non-working mood since early morning. What Delano feared most was that with the lady's appearance in the house, his master would become much more confused. Euclid couldn't honestly admit to his assistant that he hadn't even touched his wife that night, but she accidentally broke the distance, which caused warmth in the heart of the young Duke. Who would have thought that such touches would have such a big impact on a guy's mind? But the Duke could not predict that his assistant would misunderstand all his emotions. For some reason, Delano decided that Lenya's appearance had a negative impact on the gentleman's condition. The servant's noble anger knew no bounds, for he was accustomed to his master's productivity. But this time, the guy didn't even have time to leave the room to be punished for the injustice. All because the butler joyfully rushed into the office of the beloved owner of the estate. Because of his emotions, the old man did not immediately notice that he had accidentally harmed the Duke's best assistant. For the first time in a long time, the butler was so happy because there was good news. This is all because the young lady took upon herself all the financial concerns of the Rudion estate. So from now on, the assistant was ready to carry in his arms the girl who tried so hard for them. For a long time, the old man could not smile because of constant worries about debts. But now he was on cloud 9, because the lady was planning to pay off her debts. Of course, the butler immediately warned the lady that their family's debts were enormous. The Duke and Delano were very interested in the answer of the girl who behaved so confidently and impudently. It turned out that Lenya considered all financial problems to be a trifle for her rich father. So finally, the butler could breathe a sigh of relief, because the situation was gradually improving. But even after all this, Delano did not believe in the sincerity of the young lady's intentions. His words deeply outraged the maid who witnessed that conversation. The woman was able to personally verify that Lenya was not lying when she was going to pay for them. So from now on, this assistant was ready to take the side of the Duke's young wife in everything. While the servants argued, Euclid continued to maintain a mysterious and tense silence. While the heroine was trying her best to clean the dusty and dirty office, she could not have imagined that the state of this workplace would be so deplorable. The saddest thing was that the butler suddenly left the lady, and she had to deal with everything alone. But much was still inaccessible to the girl, who had not remembered all the rules of the estate. But fortunately for her, the Duke soon arrived at the workroom that Lenya was setting up. He was immediately struck by the amount of dust and dirt that had accumulated during the lack of cleaning. The guy didn't even try to hide the fact that the servants didn't have time to clean all the rooms. He was still ashamed of his modest financial situation due to the huge amount of debt. But Lenya really didn't care about the Duke's money. Otherwise, she would never have paid attention to him. She was also ready to make efforts for the sake of her assistants, who found it easier to live without the master's debts. It turned out, however, that the Duke's pride did not allow him to accept help from his wife. No matter how dire his financial situation was, the guy wanted the lady to keep the money for herself. This request surprised everyone present, because only Lenya could save the Duke's estate. Euclid himself could not really explain what feelings possessed him at that moment in time. The heroine was offended by her husband's refusal to help her, which seemed like an insignificant investment to her. So she reminded the guy that he was now making life difficult for everyone around him. As a result, although the lady did not want to be rude, she accidentally became harsh in her conversation with her beloved. The girl herself understood that she had accidentally put too much pressure on the anxious guy. The Duke had no shortage of stubbornness, as he even agreed to pay Lenya interest. The more options Euclid offered, the more offended the lady who was trying to help became. The heroine could not accept the fact that she was not allowed to interfere in the affairs of her new family. She could see from the assistants' faces that they needed financial help from anyone. The lady occupied the position of the Duke's wife and wished to live up to this status in every respect. Only now did the guy realize that he would never be able to change his wife's mind on this matter. This is how the newlyweds' first argument ended, with Lenya emerging victorious. All this time, the assistants actively pretended that they were cleaning and not eavesdropping, but the girl was still embarrassed by their presence, so she decided to finish the conversation somewhere else. But the lady did not have time to leave the room, as a surprise awaited her from one of the servants. She was always willing to give her helpers attention, but she didn't expect the consequences of those actions. Delano suddenly became filled with loyalty to his mistress, who wished the well-being of his master. Lenya couldn't even imagine that her words would touch every string of the soul of the previously distrustful guy. From childhood, this boy was raised to be the best assistant for the Grand Duke. But as an adult, the guy remained the same child at heart, so he believed all the nasty rumors that had been circulating about Lady Vasilian for a long time. It was because of this that the boy was so opposed to the master's wedding with such a frightening girl. For a long time, he tried to dissuade the Duke, as he was deathly afraid of meeting the dangerous Lenya. But everything changed when the guy accidentally overheard a sincere conversation between the newlyweds. There was finally room in his heart to trust the lady who was working for the good of the family. So Delano was no longer able to ignore the lady, who turned out to be a good person. That's how it all came to the point where the heroine stared in complete shock at the strange assistant. From now on, the servant was ready to carry out even the most difficult orders from the Duke's wife. So the lady started by asking her assistant to clean her office. And the very next morning, the girl was able to start work in order and cleanliness. Delano didn't leave Lenya after everything he said to her in the heat of the moment yesterday afternoon. What surprised him most was that the girl turned out to be an incredible professional in managing the estate. This is all because in her past life, the heroine often worked with financial reports, so she had no questions, although Delano was madly dreaming of helping her with any misunderstanding. The girl was lucky in this life too, so she received a large dowry from her father. But the debts turned out to be so numerous that the lady would have spent almost all the money on them. Until now, the assistant was surprised by the fact that the lady did not mind helping them with finances. But now, monetary losses did not bother the heroine, who always easily earned new assets. In this world, Anne helped Lenya with finances, but now the maid was not there. All because the assistant took on the cleaning of the rooms that now belonged to the mistress. So the lady had to resolve business matters on her own, under the supervision of the faithful Delano. With each passing minute, the assistant became more and more filled with admiration for the lady who skillfully ran the business. Therefore, the heroine also had to endure the admiring gaze of the servant who wanted to learn from her. Only the Duke's unexpected appearance saved Lenya from further delight from her assistant. Due to her fascination with work, the heroine completely forgot to eat. But Euclid did not miss a meal. The guy was always careful about his health, since he was already unwell. And this time, he also asked the lady not to skip meals, which was important for her body. But the Duke's daughter couldn't help but be touched by the frowning expression on her beloved's face. Meanwhile, the guy remembered that all the ingredients for the desserts had been brought. In fact, Lenya ordered them in order to have a nice tea party with the children, but she was not ready to admit to the Duke that she was trying to appease his nephews. The situation with Marianne and Dorian still worried the lady, but she was in no hurry to draw conclusions. Like the Duke before, Lenya took care of her partner, who looked tired after work. The girl sincerely wished that Euclid would not forget about the rest that he so needed. The heroine was not going to let her beloved suffer because of the huge amount of work in the estate. The Duke did not expect that another manifestation of concern from his wife would have such an impact on him. Meanwhile, Bursay was desperately trying to do everything to ensure that Lenya would leave the estate soon. The children watched their aunt with hostility, but did not dare say anything against her actions. Amy was confident that the Duke's daughter would back down in the face of her relative's enormous debt. So Madame had to wait until Euclid became completely disillusioned with his wife's skills. The woman was suspicious of Lenya only because she was a competitor in the house, so Burse hoped that the relationship between the newlyweds would soon completely deteriorate. But the children actually didn't want their uncle's wife to end up leaving the estate. Dorian blamed himself for the fact that the girl might not have settled in their northern home. This was all because Amy often forced her nephews to do things they didn't like at all. The woman controlled every step of the children, exploiting their high status. Too late, Dorian realized that his aunt had begun to look around their room with interest. But all this time, the children carefully hid from her the expensive toys that Lenya had given them. Amy immediately noticed that the item was made of good fabric and patterned elements. The woman could not even imagine that some toy could cost too much. Only now did she realize that a female voice had told her the answer about the cost. It turned out that Lenya had just come into the room at the moment when Amy grabbed the teddy bear. The heroine did not miss the fact that the children greeted her appearance with noticeable relief on their faces. This turned the girl even more against the woman who frightened her little brother and sister. From the very beginning, Burse aroused many suspicions in the heroine, but she did not find confirmation of them. All because in public, Amy pretended to be the kindest and most decent person, but Lenya felt the insincerity that shone through in every action of the children's aunt. This time, the lady was smart enough to explain to the children the importance of keeping their toys close to them. The girl made every effort to ensure that the children no longer gave away the things they had been given. Marianne and Dorian's eyes were full of gratitude to the lady who became their savior. No one had ever given so many gifts to children before, and they also wanted to receive toys. Beers had to watch from the sidelines as her rival easily charmed her nephews. Lenya made it clear to Amy not to interfere and told her about opening a business in the north. All this time, the Beers family survived by bringing goods to Rudion's estate. But Duke Basilian will clearly quickly overtake the only person who was involved in this matter. So Lenya dealt the woman a blow so powerful that she could not have even dreamed of any harm. After all, Burse had no idea what would happen to her family during Duke Vasilian's monopoly. But the heroine did not feel at all sorry for Berth, whom she did not like from the very beginning. From now on, she was going to restore order to the estate, and she began by getting closer to the children. The kids turned out to have quite a sweet tooth, and Miss was pleased to watch them. She couldn't believe that the Duke's nephews really grew up with almost no adult supervision. Marianne and Dorian's situation made them vulnerable to cunning and treacherous adults. Even in her past life, the heroine had seen people who pursued only their own interests. The lady still felt that the children's relationship with their aunt was not as good as they told her. But the kids didn't confess to the girl what emotions they felt towards Amy Beers. No matter how hard Lenya tried, she could only offer support for the children's future. For this alone, Marianne was grateful to the Duke's wife for suddenly appearing at the estate. A little later, the heroine had to return to her room, but heavy thoughts did not leave her. The assistants immediately met the lady, whom they had missed for some time. Anne immediately noticed that Lenya was thoughtful for some sad reason. The whole point was that the connection between the Birsi family and Duke Rudion did not give the heroine any peace. She had the feeling that for some reason, Euclid was spending too much money on these people. But all these relationships arose back when the guy's older brother was still alive. Upon hearing this story, the maid immediately believed that there really was some kind of catch in it. During her time at the estate, the assistant learned that the Birsi family had never been good merchants. So there must have been some nasty secret behind the Duke's help to these people. And it was up to Lenya, who had only recently arrived at the estate, to sort this matter out. Anne suggested to the lady that she could very well turn to her brother, who works with finance. But the heroine would never have decided to write to Sionel, even in such a difficult situation. Instead, she planned to find out for herself what Duke Rudion was hiding from her. Even when Euclid came to visit, it was clear that he did not want to stay close to the Emperor. It turned out that Anne had information on this matter as well, which she had received from other maids. Many believed that the ruler had been trying to launch serious attacks on the north for several years, but the maid could not reveal all the information because the lady had to learn some things from her husband. That's why the assistant fell silent at the most interesting point, which caused Lenya's displeasure. Only now did Gressel realize how bad the estate's defenses were. All this time he watched the knights, but Duke Rudion had almost no garrisons. What surprised the guy most was that Euclid personally trained all the knights. The lady had no idea that the safety of everyone in the mansion was so precarious. Of course, Rudion's ancestor had installed magical protection on the entire estate many years ago, but no one knew exactly how to use those powerful spells. Suddenly, an idea came into the heroine's head about how to at least help her husband a little. So she called to her assistants, who who were ready to do anything for the mistress. The girl didn't expect that they would become so excited after receiving her request. But what surprised the heroine most was that Anne promised to contact the guilds. While Lenya was not told the names of the places, it was the maid who first told her. A little later, the girl was finally able to be alone with her thoughts about what needed to be put in order. She specifically asked Gressel to lead a squad of knights and sent Anne for mercenaries. She also sent a letter to Cyanil asking him to check the financial affairs of the Burse family. Although the lady planned to stay away from her family, their support was essential for her. The heroine only had questions about those mercenary guilds that were known to the maid. But at that moment, the assistant still did not explain to the lady how she knew about the Black Guild. As a result, the lady was left with questions in her head that she did not dare to find answers to personally. But now was the time to rest, and Lenya understood that she would need her strength in the future. The assistant did not have time to fully prepare the bath, as the lady arrived too early. But Anne didn't make a problem out of it, because Miss praised the maid for her efforts. For this reason, the girl wanted to show off to the lady of the dressing room that she had put it in order. But at first, all the maid's actions seemed useless and stupid to the lady. But it turned out that Anne had found a secret room in which she had arranged the clothes of the Duke's daughter. The heroine couldn't even imagine that her faithful assistant would be so smart. In just a couple of days, she created a complete replica of the wardrobe that Lenya had at her father's estate. The lady could not even imagine that the maid was capable of such large-scale work in a short time. She couldn't hide her confusion, although she was pleased with the work done. Suddenly, the girl's attention was drawn to a mark on one of the objects lying on the table. Lenya remembered that Richard, whom she had long ago let go, had had a similar symbol. But for some reason, every little thing still reminded the heroine of this dangerous guy. She was sure that the former slave had long ago subjugated the criminal world of the Empire. And the girl turned out to be not far from the truth, because some time ago, someone attacked the Black Guild. The mercenaries were unprepared to fight a man who was much more skilled with a sword than they were. This stranger was Richard, who decided to find a place for himself in the secret society. The guild leader watched from the window as the man used the weapon so skillfully. He understood perfectly well that he would be unable to do anything against this powerful swordmaster. In fact, the man was warned that another person would take his place, so he was ready for Richard to appear. And in a couple of moments, he dealt with the entire base. The former leader immediately capitulated, since life was much more important to him. That's how he met the new ruler of the Black Guild, and was quite happy with his life. In fact, all this time, Richard was looking for a person who could become his master. And he knew that this guild was run by a wealthy aristocrat whom he would like to join. All these events flashed through the heroine's head while she was fast asleep in bed. The girl broke out in a cold sweat from horror, because the images in the dream were too bloody. But the lady remembered well that in the story, Richard eventually took a place in the Black Guild. Lenya had no idea how much her memories and dreams were connected to reality. At that moment, the servants burst into the mistress's room, as they had news for her. It turned out that the lady's dream was prophetic, because the head of the Black Guild had indeed recently changed. The assistants were not very surprised by this circumstance, because the current head had become weak. They didn't care what kind of person was going to continue serving Lenya, who organized the guild. But the heroine had no idea that it was she who created these terrible organizations. The lady could barely contain her emotions, so as not to reveal her doubts and fears to her assistants. The girl was absolutely sure that the original plot had not mentioned her ruling over mercenaries. But in the end, she only became more confused, so she came to the estate library for answers. But Miss never managed to get to the books, as her attention was drawn to the clock in the room. Lenya remembered how Anne used the secret passage, so she assumed something similar. But no matter how much the heroine turned the clock hands, nothing happened to the book wall. So the girl abandoned this stupid idea, which would not have led her anywhere anyway. But as soon as the lady gave in, the wall suddenly began to move after a while, and a real secret passage between the walls of the estate opened up before the Duke's daughter. The heroine's curiosity immediately overcame her doubts, because she had never seen anything like this before. Lenya was not the kind of person who could resist a mysterious adventure in the estate. No matter how creepy this place was, the lady was tempted to learn about its structure and scale. Images immediately appeared in the heroine's head about what this place could possibly contain. But in the end, it turned out that there was actually nothing remarkable in the secret passage. So Miss saw no point in staying any longer in this dusty and rather dark place. Luckily, she quickly noticed a door that led into the ordinary corridors of the estate. But Miss didn't expect that, right behind her, she would find Berse loudly scolding the children. As usual, Amy was lashing out at the kids, whom she hated with all her heart. She blamed her nephews for all her troubles, although they never did anything bad. In Marianne's head, the memory of good Lenya, who was ready to help her, was spinning. The girl had time to regret many times that she had not told about her aunt's pranks at that moment. But now the little girl has gathered the courage to stand up to the impudent adult. Burse clearly didn't expect her nephews to suddenly refuse to comply with all her demands. Before, the woman had never encountered disobedience from children who were afraid of her. But with the appearance of Lenya in the estate, Marianne and Dorian became much braver and smarter. As soon as Amy was reminded that the children were born out of wedlock, the heroine could not stand it any longer. The woman clearly did not expect that her harsh words would be revealed by her rival. The blood boiled in the veins of the heroine, who hated it when injustice happened around her. But most of all, the lady was furious that Burse cruelly abused the children. A little more, and Lenya will finally lose control of herself due to incredible anger. But then Amy realized that she didn't have to justify herself to a girl who was nothing to her. Burse clung desperately to the remnants of her dignity that had not yet been swallowed up by her fear of the lady. But all this was useless, because Lenya could not forgive anyone for humiliating children. At that moment, the lady didn't care what kind of person she was holding tightly in her arms. Of course, what she saw was too little to prove guilt, so Miss turned to the children. She had no idea that the situation with Amy's upbringing had long since gone beyond all bounds. Only the last bits of consciousness allowed Lenya not to raise her hand against the terrible woman. Although she had now let Birth go, she was later going to do everything to destroy her family. Only after this did the heroine turn to the children, who were probably terrified. But most of all, the children were worried that the Duke would find out the truth about their lineage. Only now did Lenya learn that these children were not actually Euclid's own. Their mother was from a common family, but still, Rudion's older brother loved her with all his heart. It was for this reason that the guy so diligently bribed the entire impudent Burse family. This agreement was made only to save the beloved from shame. And as a result of this marriage, children were born who bore the shame of their mother and father. But Lenya didn't see any problem in continuing to love these little ones. The lady's support surprised Marianne, who knew the truth about her mother. But the heroine was even glad, because the nephews had nothing in common with the Bierce family, and no one could prove the fact that they were not pure aristocrats by blood. But the fears inside the girl were stronger than all the words of comfort that Lenya said to her, so the heroine had to be patient to convince the children that they were loved. It turned out that all this time, Dorian had been craving love and attention from the Duke. But the boy did not dare ask Euclid for anything, since he knew that he was not related to him. In response, the lady recalled that the Duke devoted all his free time to his children because he loved them. So the girl had no doubt that the Duke's love was stronger than thoughts about his family. She managed to convince the kids that Euclid would never abandon them if he found out the truth. It was precisely confirmation that they were a real family, that the nephews had been missing all this time. The heroine's words made the children burst into tears of happiness and relief that it was all over. Although Lenya consoled the children, she herself remained tense inside. It was all because she couldn't forgive Beers for all the abuse she had done to those children.